Hey everyone, welcome to the pilot episode of Between Two Interns,
Hey.
where Eric and myself, Jemima, talk about our hot and lukewarm takes on industry news.
We got some differing opinions on Metaverse, thinking out loud, talking out loud, and sharing our ideas.
Last week there was a big event in Metaverse. Have you heard about Metaverse Fashion Week?
Slightly, no, but I didn't look into it.
Okay. Great. This is what I'm here for. So Metaverse Fashion Week happened last week, and Vogue collaborated with a few other brands, including Decentraland, who runs their own metaverse, and big designer brands like Dolce & Gabbana had their new clothing lines there. And it became this big cultural event. Anyone could come in as long as you had the appropriate technology and a computer and good Wi-Fi. But I think that as marketers, this is a really interesting event because it shows how Metaverse is becoming tied so closely into arts and culture. And as advertisers, wouldn't you say that we're like this with pop culture? We're this close together.
Yeah, you could even say that we influence it in some ways, but we also work with it. So I think there's definitely a balance.
Yeah, I agree there. And the point of me bringing this topic this week was I think it shows how I think it is an example of how people have more creative freedom in this virtual space. And I think that's what makes Metaverse so exciting to me personally, is that people have way more freedom to express themselves, but also it's a great opportunity for brands to take more risks.
Do you want to elaborate on what you mean by creative freedom?
Yeah, I mean, it's becoming a philosophical conversation, but in this physical world, we're limited by what our bodies can do, what our current technology can do.
Yeah.
But in a metaverse, there is none of that. You don't have to be limited by physics, for example. To execute something creatively.
Let's see some examples maybe of what they have at that specific fashion show.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think that'd be super cool. Because you're saying the creative freedom, I'd love to see it. We can have it pop up in the corner there too.
I mean, Metaverse Fashion Week is just a fashion week, but in Metaverse. And
you're saying creative freedom, and I'm just wondering what are in what ways, examples?
I'm speaking more from a theoretical point of view. I mean, when we pull up examples, I feel it's very interesting to see these because they look like screenshots from GTA, back in the day.
Yeah.
GTA PlayStation is what I think of. Whereas in literally 2021, 22, there's AAA games that came out Cyberpunk 2077 with crazy graphics. And it's kind of unfortunate because I feel when an older generation sees these screenshots of Metaverse, it looks wacky. And it looks a little ridiculous.
We're going to laugh our asses off seeing this way down the future. Yeah, this will be hilarious.
It looks pretty janky. I think that's one of the most unfortunate things about Metaverse.
It's almost sad that they're trying, but it still looks like the Minecraft memes that we still see. A
little bit of story time. I was getting my first tattoo done. It was a hand poke. This little guy actually. And I was talking to the tattoo artist. And we're talking about Metaverse. Somehow we came across this topic. And they tell me, I'm not interested in Metaverse. I don't think people should be that invested in it because it's not real. Whereas nature, we go out into nature and experience that or listen to music in real life. That is a real experience. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think it takes away from the value of Metaverse if it's not real?
I feel you could use that same argument and try to say the value of video games or the value of even almost TV isn't real, which is obviously a crazy stretch. So I think that specific argument to say that Metaverse isn't valid for those reasons doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
But I think when we talk about gaming, it's valid only in the sense that it's entertainment. And that's the only thing it provides. You know what I mean? Gaming is a distraction from real life. And that's the value.
The Metaverse is more so...
It's not a distraction.
It's a means for you to carry on doing what you need to do, but in a digital way.
Yeah, I think so.
And your question.
Do you think, what is more valuable to you? What do you think is more valuable?
Mm-hmm.
Not from a personal perspective, but like in general. Is it an experience in real life or an experience in the metaverse?
I mean, definitely real life. I personally have no experience in the metaverse. Do I have desire to go into it? Not necessarily. I guess that's really where I'm old fashioned.
But that's a hot take right there. As an advertiser, you're old fashioned.
Yes.
So how do you expect to survive in this industry? You're old fashioned.
I put on my floaties.
Are you on social media by any chance? You're not?
I am.
Should you be working as a strategist at Cossette?
I mean, I guess I'm old fashioned in that regard, where I'll still go for a long walk and without my device, or just try to disconnect from the digital world. I think it just plays a lot of value not into just like my own social life and how I carry on, but I think it's important, being a strategy intern, to just have moments where you just absolutely release your brain. And so I feel like having a big interest in the metaverse just absolutely deviates from me just enjoying, like, just relaxing
But a
moments.
big interest isn't the same as like an obsession. There's a line, right?
Oh yeah, with anything, yeah. Your point to that was?
I forgot where I was going with this. But like I just thought it was really interesting how you say you're not really that interested in experiencing it. Or like getting that deep into it.
I'd check it out 100%, but that's almost with anything. I'm super curious person, but I'm very aware that it's not something that I'd like actually carry on doing. Because I don't like, if I think of the applications of the metaverse, it's like one way you could use it is going online shopping. You go to the virtual grocery store, stuff like that. Like I would not in a million years have an interest in that. Just get out, experience that. Yeah, it's slightly inconvenient.
Are you a gamer by any chance?
Hardly. I mean, actually a little bit, yeah.
Okay. I think like you come from a very unique perspective than me. I'm someone who is very interested in this space, and like you, I want to try it out, but I see it becoming a bigger part of my life later down the road because I'm someone who's grown up with a lot of video games, like growing up.
Okay.
And I'm also someone who's kind of always grown up with online friends. So not really talking in person, or like not being able to talk in person because they live, I don't know, like halfway across the world.
Okay.
I'm used to those like virtual interactions.
And you think that the metaverse will just bring like a new application to all those things, and it's a new way to connect?
Yeah, I think so. And I think there's a lot of, you can be very vulnerable from a personal and emotional standpoint when you're not with someone physically.
Vulnerable.
Yeah. So when I think about like my online friendships, when I was a kid, I was very quiet, very opposite to who I am today. For those of you watching this and who know me, pretty much the opposite. But having those online friends, because they knew nothing about me in real life, I could be more honest with them. Because they don't know like what history I have. Like they don't know anything about me, really.
But you say vulnerable, wouldn't that be more so a sense of security and the fact that they don't really know you in any way at all?
Yeah, that's where I think that's what I'm trying to say. Where like,
you're
they feel
able
more
to
secure.
be more vulnerable? I mean, put yourself in vulnerable positions because they don't know?
Oh, yeah, that's what I meant.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for me, in my personal experience, like I've been able to have like deeper emotional connections with people online because there is that sense of security in like that level of anonymity. Like I can provide them as much information I'm comfortable with.
Makes a lot of sense, but I just wonder, like, it provides you more comfort in this digital space where you're allowed to almost like be yourself more. Sorry if that's putting the words in short, but how do you think that like plays out into like your physical life?
That's the thing, that I think that's the unfortunate thing, like what people are afraid about when it comes to the metaverse is that like people relying on this digital space and like that encroaching or like people I guess like retreating. Do you know what I mean?
And I think I'd agree with that. I couldn't tell you point by point off the top of my head of why, but maybe you can relate to your own perspective. But like, do you not think that being more comfortable in this digital world will make it a bit more difficult when you come out to the real world because you have that sense of comparison?
Okay, I see what you're saying. So like people will want to rely more on that digital space rather than like experience things in real life.
Because it's a more comfortable space that you have access to. So it's almost like a,
Yeah.
I don't want to call it a safety net, but it is.
No, I see what you're
like
saying.
if you strike out in the real world, it's okay because that's the space you're more comfortable in.
Yeah. I think that only applies to certain situations, mainly social situations. When you're playing games with your friends or like partying or something like that. Because as as Vancouver writes with like the mountains, it's like so close to us, like that experience, like being at the top of a mountain after like a hike or snowboarding, like that doesn't compare it to anything, to any thrill I would argue that like people might experience.
But I think what you described isn't necessarily a social event. It's more so a moment that you have with yourself where you appreciate yourself at the top of the mountain looking at a view, something like that. But it's not so like this
Yeah, you can share
everyday.
that moment with your friends though.
You can. But I'm talking about like everyday social interactions, like passing by your coworker in the
Yeah.
hall. Simple things like that, or just standing in line at the freaking burrito store.
But that could still happen in Metaverse though. Like
That can
it'd still be like lines, like you'd be in like common areas.
But
Have you ever seen the lobby of like a Final Fantasy online game?
But I think even if like you're describing that it is a place similar, but you're talking about how the digital world gives you this sense of, sure, you're able to be more vulnerable on it, but it's because you get a sense of security. You know what I mean? And you don't have that sense of security when you're here in the real world because, well, your anonymity is gone.
So what is your point? Like, are you saying that it's unhealthy?
Well, I just think that it can come to your detriment unless, I don't think we're moving to a world where we're going to be 100% digital. Maybe
you can
way
say the
down
same
the
thing for
road.
everything. Like, it's detrimental. Yeah, of course it is. Like, everything in moderation.
I don't think this is something where it's only if it's taken to the absolute extreme.
Even if you're not obsessed with Metaverse. Like,
I think that a lot of people are comfortable enough in the digital space where it's come to a detriment to them.
it's an interesting point when you say, like, oh, people, there is that group of people. I mean, we're talking about Gen Z, right? Let's just, like,
Yeah.
talk about the elephant in the room.
To sum it up. Yeah.
Yeah, like Gen Z, of which we were a part of. For
Uh-huh.
context, I'm 97 and Eric is
99.
99. I actually think that Gen Z.
You might even call me a Gen Z. Just throwing it out there. But I do not identify as one. As I said before, old school, old fashioned.
I mean, I'm like in the middle, you know? Like, I'm
You're much more Gen Z than me.
97 is like the. Oh, because I'm a gamer as well.
No.
97 is like the in between millennials and Gen Z. So it's really interesting because personally I didn't identify as a Gen Z until recently.
Since I started bullying you about it.
No, until I met someone who was born 96 and he told me, no, 97 is like Gen Z and onwards. And actually had like a bit of a, I don't know, like an identity crisis. Because up until that time, like I straight up thought that I was a millennial. Like I always thought I was a millennial. Growing up, like through high school, they were like, oh, like you millennials.
Because you couldn't label it though?
Because I've always labeled myself as a millennial. Like I just never thought of myself as like someone from Gen Z.
Okay, absolute tangent. But I think this touches back to when we were talking about how Ick categorizes things.
What is an ick for our podcast?
I think you could describe that best. I could not enjoy myself explaining it.
Okay, so a few days ago, by a few days ago, I actually mean yesterday. Was it yesterday? Yeah. Eric and I had a very heated debate about Gen Z lingo. It started off of this term that people use on TikTok primarily called an ick. So an ick essentially is a turnoff. Like when you're seeing someone on a first date and they do something like, I don't know, they have like lettuce between their teeth or they're like super, Eric is laughing right now, or they're just like super, I don't know, like awkward or they they have these like small ticks that like you don't like.
Small
or
ticks.
things. No,
Yeah.
no. Okay.
Small ticks,
okay.
I think, is what you described. An ick, a small tick, or in other words, a normal thing that somebody does that you just slightly
Okay,
disagree
can you
with.
explain what your beef is with Icks,
That you
aka
had-
turnoffs?
That you had to throw a name to it. You had to categorize it. When it's a normal, everyday social occurrence that you'll come across, but now you've labeled it, you've categorized it, and it's something that you're focused on. When you could just continue living on your life and interacting with the person. If it bothers you that much, okay, leave it alone. But
Okay, my point is about that whole like Gen Z lingo. Ick is only one. Okay, by context, Eric does not care that much about the word ick. It's really just like this word is a symptom of like the so-called problem with Gen Z, with his own generation. I think that type of terminology, or that type of like lingo, brings people together, and it's like a shared experience.
by noting what these small, like little, I guess you call them just like social awkward moments are, and like labeling them, categorize them, the more aware you become of them. I think this ties back into, what was it, the reticular activating system that we talked about. We learned this concept in lecture the other day, where to exemplify it, you think about buying a Tesla and you start seeing Teslas everywhere. You think about having a baby, you start seeing babies everywhere. So if you start pointing out these small little socially weird things and start labeling them, categorizing them, your brain's actively going to seek them out more. And I think little occurrences like this, or just like creating words and terms, just like how Gen Z likes to do in that way, I think that further contributes to the social awkwardness that they commonly face.
You're saying Gen Z is socially awkward.
Well, I mean, if you look at the overall stigma, I mean, I'm not saying like every
What is
single
a
Gen Z.
stigma for Gen Z?
Well, it's just that like the up and coming generation has like, well, partly blamed with phones, but just they're not able to socially interact with each other to the way that other generations have.
Is that okay? The thing is that a stereotype or is that real? Personally, I don't see that in real life. Do you see that?
I think no.
Is
I
that
can't
your confirmation
lie.
bias though?
I
That is
can't
your
lie.
confirmation bias speaking right now.
I can't lie.
Do you? Yeah. You know, like millennials are obsessed with avocados. I don't know a lot of millennials who are obsessed with avocados. I don't. So that's like a stereotype, you know? And I feel like Gen Z being socially awkward is a stereotype. I think this generation is like incredibly complex. People love to label groups of people for a good reason. I think that helps people make sense of what they see by categorizing them and labeling them and putting them into those little camps like millennials, avocado, Gen Z, I don't know, TikTok, Gen Z, ick.
No. See, ick is something that Gen Z came up with themselves, but
Millennials came up with avocado memes themselves. I don't know what you're talking about.
But then you're talking about like categorizing, like labeling Gen Z with these types of terms, labeling millennial with these avocado toast. That's not something that generation did themselves. That's something society. But that's something society has done to them. It's not like Gen Z would like to be labeled as the TikTok generation. That's something that society as a whole has done.
Nowadays, though, like millennials have made that avocado toast their thing. Like they make fun of themselves. They satirize themselves with avocado toast. They've like owned it.
Specifically, when you add terms and names to these like social situations, social occurrences, I think that is just, it's just making you more neurotic to the social situation. And I think that's just, there's no benefit to that.
Not to speak for an entire group of people on this world, but Gen Zs are very sensitive. You know, they've grown up with like phones. I can say we, not even they. We've grown up with like phones, internet, like at our fingertips, social media. We've grown up to be like very sensitive, and I think coming up with that sort of lingo is like an effect, almost like something that we can't control. We're neurotic because we've grown up in this like crazy, like digitalized world that our parents don't understand and that we have to make sense of ourselves.
Well, I think the digital world definitely did play a part in them becoming more neurotic well, I keep saying they. I don't mean to be smug.
Oh,
I don't mean.
Eric is not Gen Z.
I don't mean to be smug when looking back. I'm just thinking of just like things that could not be there and how we, I guess, would benefit. And I think that, well, I think that, like, what is it, whatever that word is. Neuroticism.
Yeah.
I think that essentially was a product of just like, well, the dopamine fix you get from a notification, and just like constantly access to like, oh, the next video dopamine. It just creates this laser focus.
If it's like a side effect, I think it's unfair to judge people like us.
But doing these things, like creating concepts and words like ick, does not benefit your situation. And I think being aware of that is just one step. So that's why I mention it.
Okay, even if I don't agree with how you're saying that it doesn't benefit the situation, actually, but just to tie off with that, like, even if it
Eric
doesn't,
anyway, shut the fuck up, I don't agree. Let me carry on.
Even if it doesn't benefit us, like, it's how we express like our frustration with like the world. And
why you gotta be so frustrated? What?
I think there's an element of frustration when it comes to every generation.
Yeah, I'd agree to that.
Like I said, you know, like having to make sense of this like in crazy like digital world and like metaverse and NFT and cryptos like by ourselves without our parents to help us because they don't understand. I think there's a level of frustration there.
I think every generation, the young generation is the pioneers of what came because they're the ones learning as it goes. Like, let's say the desktop, for example. Our parents didn't know what that was, but I don't think there's stress in my parents not knowing what it was. It was more so something I grew up with and came to learn. I was never stressed at the fact that the older generation didn't teach me how to do this. So I don't think that could be a source of frustration.
Has anyone ever called you a boomer?
No, but I wouldn't fight him on it.
Do you identify as a boomer?
No, I don't. No, there's definitely a derogatory.
Do you identify as a millennial?
I think I'm just in the gap in between millennial and Gen Z.
You can't pull that card. I already pulled out that card. You can't just take my cop-out answer.
No, that is... Oh, it's such a cop-out. Yeah. Because essentially, well...
I'm sorry. Are you born 87 or am I born 87?
Hey, being Gen Z, millennial, boomer, etc., there's no universal cutoff of who's in what generation. It's all...
No, there isn't.
Yeah. And I think that to touch on how it is a cop-out, like... When you look at just like anybody labeled as a boomer, Gen Z, millennial, the first things that come to mind are stupid things like avocado toast, TikTok, freaking
Icks.
Yeah, Icks, climate change isn't real mentalities, you know. So it is such a cop out, and I think it's something that's very easy to do, and I will do.
Okay, just to recap our conversation. This is an entire, like, I feel like we need an entire episode, like, dedicated to this.
I also, though...
About stereotypes behind, like, generations.
Yeah. I also want to tie back, because we can tie back this, like, neurotic tone, and also just, like, well, even just, like, saying that when we were talking earlier about the digital world, and I guess we labeled it, like, Gen Z is more so part of it, and how it can come to a detriment into their in-person lives. And that also being a contributing factor along with the other things such as labeling and categorizing everyday social occurrences like the word ick. You know what I mean? And I think these are all contributing factors that we've mentioned here that I personally think is a detriment to them that they can, well, being aware of would benefit them. But I think that you are more so on the side of it's just a cultural thing that they're a part
100%. I'm not saying that it's a
no, I mean that's
thing.
It's fair, yeah.
But I don't think it's something crazy negative. Like I personally don't see the problem with it. And maybe it's because I'm on TikTok. Maybe that's because I find TikToks about Icks like super funny because they're relatable. And I think that's like the cultural value to it is that when you come up with this lingo, like it makes it so much more relatable.
I mean, it might be a leap, and it is a touchy subject, but if you just look at like the mental health rates of the younger generation, and you couldn't directly attribute it to these things very easily.
But you think it's one of the things that like aggravate or like... make it worse.
Yeah, I think I think these are things that are contributors. The one where we're talking about like Icks and stuff like that, that is much more of a theory than the digital world. But I think both of them, yeah, I think they're more more contributing to the problem than you would assume, or maybe Gen Zs themselves would believe.
Here's kind of a lukewarm take. I think, a lukewarm take. People around our age or younger even are more self-aware than any generation has ever been.
Yeah.
And more than anything, I think that level of self-awareness and desire to, I don't know, like be better than like who you are right now, like that desire for like self-development and like self-improvement in terms of like mental, emotional, and like physical health. Okay, let's wrap up today's episode. So today we talked about Metaverse, Gen Z, what is an ick, and next week we're gonna talk about something else.
Something else. We know you love something else. And it'd be cool, yeah, if there's a certain topic that you want us to go over or a certain article that piques your interest, please feel free to share.
Send them our way and we'll include them in our next podcast of Between Two Interns. See you next week. Bye-bye.